part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Iguodala to Curry, back to Iguodala, up for the layup. Oh, blocked by James. It's over. It's over. Cleveland is a city of champions once again. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.
Hey, what's good? Thanks for tuning in to Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. John Sabol alongside two guys of the member of the podcast. One who's not here, that's Chase Smith, but we are graced with the presence of Sam Amico, senior NBA writer and founder of hoopswire.com. Sam, how you doing, buddy?
I am doing well. Thank you very much. It is silly season in the NBA, right?
It's silly season, and we'll get into all that. And of course, our other esteemed colleague joining us, JIA, Jeremy in Akron. Man, it's been a while since us three have been on the pod together. Jeremy, how you been? What's good?
I am good. I am excited. Look, anytime I get to go on the radio with you two legends, it's a good night. And I'm excited about the Cavs. I'm excited about the NBA. I'm excited about what just happened in the finals. I think it shows maybe that the Cavs aren't quite as far away as we think.
You know what? I think let's start right there, Jeremy. The NBA finals. You know, it's just a few days ago, Warriors getting that fourth title in the last, 7-8 years. You know, this is the weakest of the Warriors title teams. Real quick initial thoughts. Jeremy, we'll start with you, and then Sam. What did you think about what went down with that series against Boston? Because about 2 weeks ago in the last edition of this podcast, when Chase and I were on here, we both said Warriors in 5. We were wrong. It was Warriors in 6. But you know, we were off by a game, but we didn't put any money on it. So I guess that we dropped the ball on that one.
You know, I got to say, I think it's impressive that the Warriors were kind of able to rebuild their roster the way they were, and they were able to kind of reinvent themselves, right? With guys like Otto Porter, guys like Andrew Wiggins, who had the series of his life, by the way, Jordan Poole, you know, Curry's getting a little older, Draymond's a shell of himself, Clay, you know, after the injuries, a little beat up, but the fact that they were able to get to where they got to and win the championship while rebuilding the roster, I think it says a lot about the organization and says a lot about Steve Kerr as a coach.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, that was the biggest thing. Steve Kerr, I think, doesn't get enough credit for what this team did this year in Golden State in terms of how they've, you know, they were healthy, obviously. Clay's still not 100%, may never be, but he's still got those guys locked in and having some of those younger guys up like a Poole and really got them going. And of course, it doesn't hurt when you got like Steph Curry on the roster still.
Yeah, he opens up everything, obviously, for everybody else. But the nice thing when you're talking about Steve Kerr is you got major production out of Andrew Wiggins, Jordan Poole. These were not high-profile guys. You know, I mean, Wiggins, obviously, former number 1 overall pick, but just never really was an all-star, you know, until this year. And I think that you do have to credit Kerr's philosophy and his system. People forget that the Warriors are, obviously they have great shooters, but they're probably also the best passing team in the NBA. So if you can get everybody to buy into that, you know, don't monopolize the basketball, move it around, keep it moving, keep yourself moving toward the basket. They get so many baskets off the old school pass and cut, almost like a Princeton offense. So yeah, I mean, everybody around the league, this is Steve Kerr's best coaching job. I wouldn't have picked the Warriors to win it all at the beginning of the year. This wasn't, you know, 3 or 4 years ago where we were always picking them. I thought, you know, this would be like Phoenix or somebody else. And if the Warriors did come out of the West, they wouldn't have won. So yeah, this wasn't a team that you thought, oh, this is a dynasty team. You just thought they're pretty good. Can they put it all together? And they did. So, you know, they all deserve credit. And obviously, you know, Steph Curry is just as good at, you know, after a couple of years of injuries and now older. And this is the age that guards almost always seem to start losing their legs. He hasn't lost a step. So credit to them as much as our listeners probably don't want to give them any credit.
Well, I don't play them. Chase and I said on the night of game 1 that this was a game Cleveland fans just did not, or the series was just a series that Cleveland fans did not want to root for, because they're the most two hated teams that the Cavaliers play, obviously history, two big rivals. I guess you can say Golden State's a rival because the finals, not really anymore, those 4 years of LeBron. But I mean, if you're a Cleveland fan, that was a no-win situation. Lose.
It was like a 7-game series between the Steelers and the Ravens.
It's exactly what it was. Yeah. It's a good comparison. I mean, listen, give credit when credit's due. Love them or hate them. You got to respect the dynasty and what they've done. As much as I can't stand that organization for what they've done with the Cavs and some of those players in terms of, the Draymond Greens and Klay Thompson and Steph Curry's attitudes over the years and the cocky and arrogance. And you can be cocky and arrogant because you win. And I respect them as players, but you can't, as a fan, let's be real. We don't like them. Right.
Yeah.
But right. They have built that team, and that organization has built that team the right way through the draft. They've drafted guys, they're bringing in young guys now. You can't help but tip your hat to what they've done.
Yeah. Well, and they never really yes, they got Kevin Durant, but Durant wanted to go there.
Yeah.
They got Andrew Wiggins, which was at the time was not viewed as a major move. It was, well, he's a nice above average role player,
Well, and as Jeremy will say, I know he will, Kevin Durant wanted to go there only because Draymond Green, sat in his car after game 7 of the 16 finals and cried and begged him to come to Oakland. Am I wrong, Jeremy?
And I was going to tell that story. It was from the parking lot of the arena, they said.
Mm-hmm.
From the parking lot of the arena, Draymond Green was on the phone with Kevin Durant, talking him into coming there so they could win another one. So yeah, just incredible stuff.
Yeah.
How do you think Kevin Durant feels?
No kidding. And you know what? And we'll talk about this too. That new report about Kyrie and at an impasse with the Nets. Yeah. How does Durant feel about that?
No, if they don't get Kyrie Irving back, they can forget about Durant wanting to be there.
Yeah.
There's got to be something with Durant, right? I don't know. Does he rub people the wrong way? Like, what is it about him? He's just I know he's kind of a different guy, and obviously so is Kyrie Irving, but it just feels like guys just don't get along with him. The burner accounts on Twitter, all the weird stuff with him.
Yeah. He's wired differently in a bad way, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't disagree.
True. All right. So before we get into Cavs and the drafts, one last note, because we don't want to spend too much time on the finals and everything. I'll ask both of you, but Sam, we'll start with you first. This Warriors team is still here to stay. This core is not going anywhere. Some can argue they had an easier path to the finals because the Bucks weren't 100% in the East. The Nuggets were not full 100%. Other teams in the West weren't 100%. Whatever. Championship's a championship. That said, though, those other teams are getting reloaded and are getting healthy. Golden State's the odds-on favorite to win it next year. Vegas says that. A lot of books already have that out there. Are they still the big team to beat in heading into next season? Are you thinking that they will be in your Sam Amico predictions when we do a podcast come October when we give our predictions? Are you picking them to win the title in 22-23? Or are you going to, take the field and take some of those other big teams like Milwaukee, Boston, Phoenix?
No, I would take the field now. I think there's also going to be some big moves made. I think Phoenix, I'd be surprised if DeAndre Ayton goes back there. I think there's going to be a sign and trade type of scenario. They could really improve themselves. I don't know what happened with them in their meltdown, in the playoffs. Look, and there are teams that are going to try to make some major moves here. But I think overall, even everything being equal or everybody coming back the same next year, I Golden State, yeah, maybe you could say they're the favorites, but they're not the clear-cut favorites. And I think the NBA, to me, finally has the parity that so many fans have been clamoring for so long. You enter a season and you think, yeah, maybe this year you entered the season thinking, are the Bucks really the favorite? Are the Lakers because they got Russell Westbrook? There are so many different things you could say, so many different teams you could pick. Phoenix, the Sixers, the Celtics, the Heat. Maybe I'm missing a couple in there, but I think it's good for the league now that you do have some parity. And maybe, yes, okay, we'll say the Warriors are going to be the favorites, but I don't think, in my opinion, they are heads and tails above everybody else. I think they're a good basketball team, clearly, that has won before and was in a good situation this year. But to me, they're not the Warriors, obviously, of Kevin Durant and a younger Klay Thompson, younger, healthier Klay Thompson. So I would pick the field only because the NBA has shown us over the last couple of years that it's much more balanced.
Right. Sam, you touched on something big there. The league has changed so much. Remember, just a couple of years ago, there was basically 4 teams. You could roll 4 teams out. The other teams are just playing for, recreation, essentially, right? There was 4 teams every year that had a shot to win the championship. Now, next year, we can't even pin a favorite, right? Yeah. You got Memphis, you got Philadelphia, Milwaukee. There's a lot of teams that can factor in, and that wasn't the case before. And I like that. That's where the NFL always had the edge on the NBA, was so much more parity. So there was more cities interested the whole year, the whole year. And now I think the NBA might have hit that sweet spot where they have more teams and more fan bases interested through the whole year because more teams could win it.
So let me ask you this, guys. Do you think that the reason why we're seeing a more balanced NBA, because you're seeing the kind of, the Warriors are still there, but they're not as dominant as they were. The guys that have been running this league for the last 7-8 years, getting older. LeBron. The Warriors are still there, but Durant's getting older. Westbrook and Harden aren't the same guys, and you're getting a lot of influx of younger talent getting on the precipice of this league now, where it could go in any different direction.
Yeah, I would think so, and I think that like to your point, John, is that they are getting older, and they're getting to the point where guys at their age 10 years ago were hanging them up.
Mm-hmm.
Now guys are extending their careers a little bit longer. I'm sure part of that's training and nutrition, and they're able to play longer. But the bottom line is, when you're 38, you're not going to be as quick as somebody who's 22, 23 years old, and so I think that plays into it. I also think it doesn't hurt that guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo and Luka Doncic and some of these younger players aren't hopping around. They're not going ring searching. They want to be the guys on their team, right? Giannis signed the max extension in Milwaukee. Luka signed the max extension in Dallas. Really, you look at Dallas, well, they went to the Western Conference Finals this year. They may be a couple of pieces away from really big things. Doncic is pretty doggone good, and he's still extremely young. So I think that there's a lot to it. That generation, and this isn't an insult, but that generation where these guys were constantly switching teams, wanting to switch teams and ring chase, where the stars were doing that. I like you said, they're just getting older. I think there's new blood in the league and a new mindset of, I want to try to win one with the franchise that drafted me, and I'm going to try to stick it out through thick and thin with this franchise.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think when you look at the future in the league from 5, 8, 10 years from now, I'd love to see where Luka and Giannis are in terms of what teams they're on, if they're still there, and how many championships more for Giannis, or if Luka's able to get one. You mentioned some of these teams that are still going to be there next year. We talked about Memphis, Dallas. I think Denver's going to come back strong with a healthy Jamal Murray and Porter. If you look at the standings, I know the regular season doesn't mean anything in the NBA, but I find it very interesting and intriguing. The Cavs only had 9 wins less than the Warriors did. Isn't that weird?
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know. I know it's regular season, but it's just kind of funny to look at that.
Well, you think that they could probably have come close had they stayed healthy, but
sure.
That really goes to the point that, there's so much parity in the league right now, that it's not a big surprise. The Eastern Conference, usually the sad sack of the NBA this year had a heck of a battle for playoff seeding right down to the final 2 or 3 games.
Yep.
And it's going to be that way next year. I mean, you can look right now, just look at the talent in the East. It's going to be a dogfight next year for positioning the whole year. It's just an interesting, fun league right now. It really is.
And before we take a break here and talk draft, one point I want to make about Boston. We didn't get a chance to talk about Boston much at all. I think Jason Tatum, and I've always loved his game. I think he was exposed, he and Marcus Smart were exposed in a very bad way. And Boston was exposed in a bad way. They need more help. I mean, the turnovers and Jaylen Brown constantly turning the ball over, dribbling the ball off his foot. Tatum, he can't get out of a double team or he just doesn't know what to do. He panics. There's some change that needs to be going on there. And I'm not talking trade anybody because they're not going to do that now. Who knows? Maybe they will. Unlikely, but they need to do like a philosophy change, and they need another scorer there. They need a ball handler. And, Al Horford, 36 years old, man, he had a phenomenal season, a resurgence. He's not the answer. You got to get upgrades there in a big way for Boston in order to come back strong when Miami, Milwaukee, and Philly are right there.
Yeah.
Well, they've been looking for a point guard, right? They had Kemba Walker there at one point, and the problem with Tatum and Brown, and I'll let you carry this home, Jeremy, but and there's not many problems with those guys. They're both really good players, but the problem is neither of them are real good passers. So
yeah,
I don't want to say anybody's a lousy passer, but for superstars, they're at the bottom, when it comes to passing, and that impacts them in double teams. It causes turnovers, and that's okay because they're so good in every other area. But when you have your two wing players who aren't great passers, and you don't have, a point guard to facilitate a real good point guard, that's where they're lacking. Is they tried Dennis Schrader, they've tried Kemba Walker. I don't even, Smart was playing point, and you've got to get a real facilitator because your superstars aren't good enough passers. But that's just to win a championship. They had a great run.
I agree with that 100%. It doesn't feel like either one of those guys is like the stone cold killer, the guy that you could just last possession of the game, put it in his hands, and he's going to come through. It just doesn't feel like either one of those guys are that. They're both great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I would love to have either one of them on our team, but it just doesn't feel like either one of them is that guy. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. I think if you did find that facilitator to play with those two, a guy who could really get you into the offense, obviously that's not Marcus Smart. They don't have that guy, but if they found that guy, then you might be onto something. But I just think that's kind of the missing piece there.
Well, they tried to get that guy in Derek White in the midseason trade, did they not? I mean, he came from San Antonio, but that wasn't obviously the answer either.
He's a nice player. He's more like a Sexton type, though. Probably, a guy who's going to just fill it up a little bit. He's not really a facilitator very much.
Right. Well, Boston's got some work to do. A lot of the other NBA teams do as well, including our Cleveland Cavaliers. Coming up after the break, Sam, Jeremy, and I will talk draft, who we think the Cavs will take. We're just a few days away from the NBA draft. Could they trade back? Could they trade up? They have two other picks in the second round. Could they package those? We're going to dive deep and break down that draft coming up right after this break.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Voorhees.
And I'm Brian Shaw. No, not the pitcher. We're the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast, formerly at Swinging a Tribe.
Don't have time to watch 162 games of baseball? We do. We have you covered with recaps of the games, stats, and analysis throughout the MLB season.
Subscribe now to Guardians of the Land and press play pods for all your Cleveland sports analysis.
Looking for new insights on the Cleveland sports scene with a unique side of Cleveland sports history? Then you found the perfect podcast. I'm John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol, and we're hosts of the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, a podcast about Cleveland sports, but not your typical podcast about the land's sports teams. Join us as we embark on a journey of sharing a unique and historical side of Cleveland sports history with the help of some former Cleveland sports stars and other historical figures.
All right here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. my hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Cavs on the Break, NBA podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. John Sabol alongside JIA, Jeremy in Akron, and Sam Amico from Amico Hoops. You can follow Sam at Amico Hoops. You can follow Jeremy in Akron. What is it? Is it just Jeremy in Akron?
At
or is it
Jeremy in Akron. Yep, that's what it is. At Jeremy in Akron. JIA.
I'm surprised no one stole that Twitter handle.
They did. Well, Chase bought it back.
Oh, that's right.
And Chase had to pay for it to get it back after my prolonged absence. So,
oh man, that's hilarious. Well,
you guys want to hear a quick story, which is a great Twitter handle mistake story. Well, it's actually a great mistake story. So I go on the radio wherever, Toronto. This was in Canada, this particular radio hit. They asked me to come on. I go on, I'm waiting, listening to my introduction, and the whole time the guy's talking about the Athletic and how he loves the Athletic and da-da-da. And then he says, and Sam Amick is one of my favorite writers.
No.
Going on and on. Which is fine because Sam Amick's one of my favorite NBA writers too. But I
am not him.
I'm sitting there on the phone thinking, what do? I can't go on as Sam Amick. I don't want to correct the guy on the air and make a fool out of him.
Oh, I would have done that.
Yeah, but actually this is Sam Amico Hoopswire. I didn't have the energy to go through all that. So he said, so here he is, Sam Amick. And I hung up the phone live on
did you really? Did he call you back? What happened?
Well, the producer called me back a couple of times. I didn't answer. And then he said, Sam, I'm sorry we lost you. I hope everything's okay. And I never responded to that either. Eventually I did, but for like 24 hours, I just let it go, only so that they would think Sam Amick's like a massive jerk. And I told Sam that. I said, I wanted them to think they thought I was you. So I hung up on them. And then they were sitting there thinking that Sam Amick hung up on them and didn't respond. So I was like, so I got off scot-free. They thought you were the jerk.
That's funny. Well,
it's the only time that's ever happened. The only time.
If he followed you, he'd realize your Twitter handle is at Amico Hoops and Sam Amick is at Sam_Amick.
Yeah, and what's so weird is the guy had my number. He had my number. So I must have gone on with him at some other point if he had my phone number. So I don't know.
Well, listeners,
there you go. There's the best story of the podcast.
Sam Amico. Sam Amico. We love him. He is here on our episode here, as he always is for the most part, and follow him at Amico Hoops. But you can follow Sam Amick too. You can follow Jeremy in Akron, again, at Jeremy in Akron. You can follow me at John_Sabol. You can follow the pod, the Cavs on the Break and NBA podcast pod at Cavs on the Break on Twitter. All right, boys. We got something going on later this week as we record this here on Monday, June 20th. We are, 4 days away from the NBA draft coming up here later this week. So Cavaliers are on the clock. They've got a lottery pick. We didn't think they would be in a lottery situation, but here we are. Sam, let's start with you. On June 23rd, I guess 3 days away, at the Barclays Center, Cavs, when the clock in their position gets to them at 14 and they're on the clock, what do? Do they trade or do they take the best available player on the board? And if so, who do you think they go with?
They have talks about potentially moving that pick. I ran that story on the website the other day that they're talking about moving down from their number 14 spot if they can land another first rounder, which is certainly feasible. because a lot of those you name a team in the 20s for the most part, and they want to get rid of their first round pick, or at least kind of move down later. A lot of those teams, when you're talking about teams usually that are drafting in the 20s, these are teams that are veteran teams that don't really want to add the guaranteed rookie contract. So I think it's a possibility that the Cavs could potentially move down and are having those discussions. We've seen Kobe Altman also do this in the past, where he packages the 2 second rounders and moves back up into the first. So they could draft 14 and say like 28, 27, something like that, if they are able to move those second rounders. That said, 90% of the time, or at least it seems like 90% of the time, we hear all this buzz going in the draft because all these GMs truly are talking, but they very rarely follow through on a deal. So I'm going to say that the Cavs will draft number 14. And I know, the local guy is kind of the favorite. Malachi Branham played at Akron St. V. I think that the Cavs are entering this offseason. One of the things they want is to add some perimeter shooting. They want to add another wing player. He fits that role. And presumably, if you've seen the mock drafts, he's the guy who will be there. Or could be there. He's kind of looked at as like in the 13 to 18 range. And if Cavs draft in 14, well, maybe it makes sense. Okay. So that said, I know that's the guy Jeremy wants them to take. So I'm going to say Terry Eason, the power forward from LSU, is who they will take. That's actually who I have them taking in the draft, with Branham going 15 to the Hornets. And I think they really like Eason. I do. He's 6'8", good athlete, plays either forward position, and could be a guy who really helps them off the bench. So,
and the thing about Malachi Branham is, even though he's a local guy, so yeah, obviously he actually fits a need because he can play either guard position, right? He's 6'5", he has some length, which you need next to Garland. He can take some pressure off Garland because he can handle the ball. He can shoot the three. He can get to the rim. I really like him. And, we talked about this a little bit on the break. He's kind of hit or miss. Some people have him as high as top 10. Some people apparently have him not even going in the first round.
Yeah, so, I saw that on, like we were just talking on the break. Yeah, CBS Sports didn't have him in their latest mock draft in the first round. That's got to be a mistake.
It's got to be. There was early on in the draft process, there was a lot of articles saying he was shooting up teams' draft boards. Mm-hmm. So, but I think Sam's right. I think the 13 to 18 range is probably where he ends up, although I have seen him as high as 9. So I think he'd be a good fit. And not just because he's from around here. Now, yeah, the last guy we drafted from St. V worked out pretty well, right? So, Andy's a Buckeye, but I really do think his skill set fits kind of what we're looking for and what we need.
Well, I mean, he's a wing guy, and the Cavs desperately need a wing that can score, that can shoot. That's their biggest, Achilles heel right now. They don't have that player, and they did, but that player now plays for the Lakers, and he's getting in his upper 30s.
Right. And some of the scouting reports I read about him, though, say he's an underrated ball handler. So he could take some of the pressure off Garland. You know how the Cavs like to take Garland off the ball at times and let him run off screens. And Branham may have the skill set to help there as well.
Now, Sam, the Cavs did have him in recently for a workout, but I know he had a sprained ankle, so he didn't work out. He just met with the team. And then they were going to bring him back. Have they brought him back yet for that workout?
Not that I'm aware of. It's interesting. The NBA pre-draft workouts have always really interested me because there are teams who will just send you an email, send you a text. We're bringing in these guys. And then there's the Cavs who historically have been pretty hush-hush about who they're bringing in, when they're bringing them in. So you kind of got to figure it out on your own. And I have found personally from my website that it's a lot of work for little reward because you find out who's coming in for the workouts and nobody reads it. But as far as that straight information, no, I don't know. They're not a team, for better or for worse, that's going to really come out and share who's come back. But I suspect he will be back before Thursday. And usually Wednesday's the last day, guys work out for teams the day before the draft.
John, Terry and Sam, I think you said you had the Cavs taking Terry Eason, right? He's a guy I think that would fit as well because I think he's got a 7'2" wingspan. He's a guy who can guard all 5 positions. So he kind of fits with the Cavs philosophy.
He does.
You know?
You're right.
So
He does.
So I think that's something, to keep an eye on too this Thursday, I think.
Yeah. Mark Williams from Duke is another potential guy. If he's there, could be. I don't know that they want to draft a backup center because when if you draft Mark Williams from Duke, he's going to be your backup center. You could probably find that in free agency and get a veteran guy to do that, like a Moses Brown and Ed Davis type of thing, where you can bring in guys cheap. I don't think they'll draft. I'd be shocked if they drafted a point guard because they want to bring in a veteran point guard. Obviously, we've heard the Ricky Rubio talk, but I mean, he's not going to be available till like January. And I think they want to draft or get a veteran free agent for their backup point guard. They don't want a rookie backing up Garland and Sexton or whoever.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a wing player or a power forward or the forward like Eason, who can play both forward spots.
And to your point, Sam, they don't need a point guard. Now, the one guy that does still intrigue me is Dyson Daniels, the G League Ignite kid from Australia. He's 6'7", but he's not really a true point guard. He can still play wing. I don't think he'll be there. I think he could be gone in the top 5, top 7. I think he'll
probably be gone. And they'll have some things to figure out. I mean, the Cavs, when it comes to the kind of that, because obviously first you got to get Sexton re-signed, then you got to figure out if he starts or comes off the bench. You got to figure out about Karis LeVert. You got to figure out about Isaac Okoro. You got to figure out about Cedi Osman. All these things, they kind of have a little glut there where there's a lot of guys who can play and produce, and you've got to find minutes for them or get something back in return for them. So I'd be surprised if they went, center or point guard, but I think that they'll get a wing, and they really want to get a shooter. If they don't get one in the draft, they'll try to get one through free agency for sure.
Have you guys heard about this Jalen Williams guy from Santa Clara? He's another one that's kind of came out of nowhere, and people are saying 15 to 18. He's like a 6'6", traditional 2 guard who could get to the rim and shoot a little bit. Maybe that's another one to keep an eye on, Jalen Williams.
Yeah, he's had some good workouts. I've heard he's having some good workouts, and his stock has risen because of that.
So, Sam, you picked Eason. Jeremy, you picked Branham.
I'm going to say Branham.
I'm going with you, man. I'm picking Branham as well. Eason, though, Sam, that it's intriguing. You're right, though. It's either going to be, a power forward like Eason, or you're going to, potentially get a guy like Branham in there who can shoot the ball and play guard too. I think it's down to those two guys if they're there. I know they've claimed to like Johnny Davis, the kid out of Wisconsin. Right. I don't think he's going to be there, but again, that's not a position of need. I would like for them to go with Branham because, think about this though. He's a guy that is almost your younger, cheaper Karis LeVert, yet not polished. We know kind of what LeVert is,
right.
Branham's ceiling's way higher than LeVert's was.
Well, and you think about, especially, coming out of college, for sure, I think that Branham's ceiling's viewed as higher. But I would say if they draft a point guard or draft a center, I think that then you pretty much know, they're probably going to make a trade here. But I would, the guy, of course, you would like to see is Branham. I mean, sure. And I'm going to have another mock draft come out on the day of the morning of the draft. And that's kind of the guy you would like to see just because he is a St. V guy, Ohio State guy, and you can allow him to develop. You don't have to rush him into action, but he might be able to contribute right away too. So
who can contribute right away, Malachi Branham or Eason? Who's more of a guy that fans can see?
I think if you asked around the NBA, it'd probably be Eason. Only because
he plays defense. Because he plays defense.
Well, right. He's a better defender, and more than that, usually big guys, because of their size, don't have as hard of a time adapting. Whereas guys who are guards, regardless of how tall they are, if that's your skill set, you're a guard. The NBA is just a bigger adjustment for guards than it is for big guys, because even big guys can at least nothing else. They have their size. They can disrupt shots. They can get in and mix it up underneath. If you're a guard, you've got to be able to shoot, and you've got to adapt to the pace and speed of other guards and other wings. It's just a more difficult position to play, or at least when you're a young guy, it's a tougher job.
All right. Cavs have 2 other draft picks in the second round. They have the 9th in the second, and then the 22nd in the second round. Usually these guys never really sniff the NBA, let's be honest. Some do. Some can be contributors, but some really don't ever really pan out, and they're bench guys, second, third string dudes. Do they draft all 3 positions or all 3 picks, Sam and Jeremy? What do you guys think? Or do they maybe package those for someone else?
Well, I think that they won't. Maybe they'll draft all 3 players, but I would suspect that they're probably going to try to move one of their second rounders. They could. It's very rare, especially when teams like the Cavs have 2 second rounders that they are able to that they want to keep both of them sometimes, but
yeah,
it just seems rare. I think that they'll, if they keep both second rounders, put it this way, I'll be pretty stunned. I think they'll move at least one, if not both,
or someone they could stash overseas for a few years. A guy we've never heard of that, they've been eyeing, that they think a young developmental guy that they can keep in, Lithuania or wherever for a couple of years. That's also a possibility.
Are we all in consensus that Jabari Smith, the kid out of Auburn, is going to be the first pick to Orlando?
I think so. Everything's looking that way.
Yeah, that's who I picked. And like Jeremy said, everything we're reading and seeing is that's Orlando's guy. It wouldn't be a huge surprise if they reversed course and took Holmgren, but everything we're reading and hearing is that it's going to be Jabari Smith, Holmgren second to the Thunder, and then Paolo Banchero from Duke, number 3 to the Rockets. I think those are the scenarios that everybody's saying are how it's going to go down.
I love Paolo, man. I think he's got so much upside. I think he could end up being the best player in this draft.
Yeah, there were people who said just what you said right now last year about Evan Mobley, and he went 3 too. So
yeah, kind
of interesting.
So I'm curious here. If the Cavs take a Tari Eason and they take, that's a power forward, does that really screw up what they want to do with their wing issue? I mean, that means they're going to have to make a trade for a winger. Or are you thinking, Sam and JIA, that it could very well just be, hey, we're taking the best available guy we have, and we're going to probably try to re-sign Sexton and see what happens with LeVert and how this pans out?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that you always take the best player on your board, because you don't want to draft the guy and go, well, this other guy was the best player on our board, but at least we got this wing now who sits the bench. You know what I mean? You're going to take the best guy, and then if he's a stud, you let it work out in training camp and let it work out down the road, because the bottom line with this league is you draft for fit and you draft for talent. The best talent always wins in the NBA.
Stay true. Yep. Stay true to your board, right? That's what they always say. Stay true to the board.
By the time the draft rolls around, their board is, listed 1 through 100 or whatever. They don't veer from that. It's like, this is our board and this is the way it's going to be. And if a point guard is the only player left and he's at the top of their board, that's who they'll take. And then we'll all be like, gosh, look, Amico was wrong again.
Well, Eason is 6'8", 217, and that right there is the same height as Kevin Love. He's 6'8". This
and you are going to have to replace Love eventually, if not this season. Even you're going to have to replace him somehow, some way.
And you're going to need to replace Lauri Markkanen at some point too.
Probably, right.
So it's a good problem to have if that board falls that way, and if those two guys, Tari Eason and Malachi Branham, are available. That's a good position to be in for the Cavs. If the board falls that way, I wouldn't be opposed or wouldn't be upset if they picked either one of those two guys. Hopefully, it will come down to that. All right, before we wrap this episode up, you mentioned Collin Sexton a little bit ago, Sam. You wrote an article about him and the money that he may get There's been some buzz. There's some teams out there that are reportedly interested in him, what the Knicks, the Wizards. I've read the Spurs somewhere, maybe to have a running mate with Javonte Murray. The Cavs want to keep him. We know that. And it's going to come down to money. What do you think ultimately what happens with Collin Sexton?
I think the odds are he's back. I mean, we've heard the Cavs are kind of aiming for the 15 to 18 million range annually. And that he's kind of seeking, 20 to 22 million annually. So they're not that far apart. I mean, maybe you can come to 19, but so I don't think it's insurmountable that he resigns and that they get a deal worked out, but you're going to have those conversations, and they're not going to be easy conversations. Okay. So you go from those conversations, the money bargaining table conversations, and then all of a sudden you're going to be talking about his role. Do the Cavs want him to come off the bench? Do they, how do they want to use him? How are they going to utilize him? Because when he got hurt, as we've talked about before, when he got hurt, he was the face of the Cavaliers. Now he's coming back to a team with Darius Garland as the face of the Cavaliers. Now, there's no animosity between them. They really seem to like each other, so that, don't read that the wrong way, but let's just put it in everyday life. Let's say you're the hot young computer salesman prospect at your new company, and you're selling more computers than anybody else. And then because of circumstances, you got to take a year off, and then you come back, and all of a sudden this company's touting someone else as the face of the company. He's the hot new young computer salesman, so it's just human nature to kind of be like, well, maybe I'm not a great fit here anymore. This is Darius Garland's team, and that's not to say Sexton is a guy who's selfish or I'm just saying, put it in terms of everyday human nature. And maybe at that point, maybe you move on from that. I don't want to say checked out, but maybe psychologically you're like, yeah, I mean, this is this guy's team now. And it was my team for a while, and now I don't, and that's just all hypothetical. There could be a situation, and I think this is probably likely, where he resigns, he comes back and he fits in, because he was showing he was fit in Collin Sexton before he got injured. Yep. The other thing to keep in mind here, a new wrinkle, is the fact that Collin Sexton is now represented by Rich Paul, who represents Darius Garland. And that was not the case before. Now this season, since Sexton got hurt and missed the season, during that time, he joined up with Rich Paul in Clutch Sports. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics here that I think that, you have to think about and consider, not to mention the fact that Collins is restricted free agent. Some other team could swoop in and pay him way more than the Cavs want to pay him. And if that's the case, we saw it happen last year with Lonzo Ball in New Orleans, got traded to Chicago. I think that possibility exists. So,
Yep.
It's hard to project, but the bottom line is, once you get past the money, and those are going to be some, those talks are always a little tough. But once you get past that, then you got to talk to him about his role. There's a lot to manage here with him, and he's a great kid. I've interviewed him. I see him in the locker room. You see him on the bench. He's a great guy. There's never, he works his butt off. He does seem to be team first. So, they all have that going for him. But I think that they're about to enter a little bit of a tricky off season with him, even though everybody's saying the right things. It's going to be a little bit tricky. And when that happens, when it can get tricky, sometimes it goes the other way. I'm not saying it will. Sometimes it does. And I think that, maybe Cavs and their fans need to be prepared for that. And Collin Sexton and his team need to be prepared for that, because, there's a lot of unknowns right now, even though everybody's saying the right thing. It's really entering kind of a mysterious, weird time for them. Now, that said, he could be re-signed 1 week in free agency in early July, and then, you all move forward together.
So I think, Sam, I think they're going to re-sign him for sure. And I think they're just collecting assets at this point. I think he's an asset. They know that. They don't know his role yet. We all know that the Cavs are never going to be able to sign big-time free agents. So I think that they'll have him here either as, a potential trade chip one day if it doesn't work out, but they're just going to hang on to him because he is an asset. And as you said, he did fit in early in the year. So this could just work out as him being an excellent player. So I think that 100%, in my opinion, the Cavs end up re-signing Collin Sexton.
And I will say I have never been as impressed with him as I was at the start of the season before he got hurt, because, they clearly become a team predicated on ball movement, sharing the wealth. They have plenty of scorers, and he clearly took a step back in his shot attempts and fit in. And I know it was a small sample, but it was really impressive how a guy without causing any kind of fuss went from scoring 24 points a game to 16. And it wasn't because he got worse. It was because he took a step back for the good of the team. And I was wildly impressed with him. And I think, they're going to use that negotiation as they should.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. I think at this point in time, no matter what kind of offers can get on the table for him from other teams, I think the Cavs are going to bring him back. I think the fact that he already came off the bench for the first, 11 games last year before he got hurt just goes ahead and shows that he is willing to come off the bench, maybe for the long term or maybe for the short term. Who knows about the long term with Darius Garland? The question is, though, if they do re-sign him, put the money aside, what are we looking at in terms of length and years? What would you pin that at?
Well, I mean, I think it'll be 2 or 3 years, three. I think it would be like 3 years with an option in there somewhere
for a fourth.
Obviously, at the end, I don't know whether it would be team or player. Probably, maybe a team. I'm not really sure, but I think it would be a 3 year. I don't think it would be 5.
I've been thinking 3 and 60, similar to Lauri Markkanen type.
Yeah,
deal.
Right. That would make sense, and that would be something that I think that you come to agreement on, and it's not unmanageable for the Cavs, and Collin has an opportunity. If what you're saying is true, Jeremy, or something in that range, he'll have an opportunity to, get a bigger deal while he's still in his prime after that 2 or 3 year period.
Well, we'll wait and see. They got some moves they got to make, and who knows, with Kobe Altman as the GM and seeing what they've done in the past and what he's been able to do, he could throw out some random trade before the beginning of the season even starts, not necessarily including Collin Sexton, but in terms of trying to retool this roster. I think I speak for both of you guys that you are opposed to giving Karis LeVert a contract extension now. Wait till after the year. Is my assumption correct on that?
I'll let Jeremy go first.
Yes,
I've talked more than Ray Guy already, so
I don't think so. I don't think he's trash like a lot of Cavs fans do, and I want to see what we can get out of him this year and where he fits once they have an off season to figure out what to do with him and to work him in. So I'm actually intrigued to see what he does. But yeah, I don't think at this point right now you can give him an extension. It just doesn't make sense currently.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, you can't give him the extension now. You can at some point. You don't have to wait till the end of the season. But I think that he deserves more time. I think he deserves a training camp with his teammates. I think he deserves, this off season, these off season workouts that they'll be doing at some point. You can't write the guy off. He looked really good his first few games. Then all of a sudden the All-Star break came. Then all of a sudden he hurt his foot, and I don't know that foot was ever feeling good. So I mean, you just can't, you got to give him some time. And I know, any fan base in any sport, it takes them a while to warm up to a guy. And there were times last year where I was kind of like, well, he's dribbling too much. He's doing, but I just think you got to give him some more time. You can't give him 20 games or whatever 15 games and then say, well, this guy's not a fit. The guys deserve fun than that.
He got thrown into an awkward situation when you had all the other guys going down with injuries, didn't know the system. Then he got hurt. What was it? The first practice back from the All-Star break, sprained his foot. Yeah. He was a shell of himself for the majority of the season. Give him time, see what he can do. The Cavs are in a win-win spot here because think about this. If he performs well, give him his extension at the end of the season. If he doesn't perform well and he plays like he did this past year, albeit healthy, then they can either A, let him walk, or maybe deal him at the trade deadline because he is an expiring contract just like Kevin Love. So the Cavs are having a
you have to remember, they didn't give up anything to get him. Okay, well, they, first round pick. Well, they didn't want that first round pick. They wanted to be in the playoffs. So they didn't, Ricky Rubio, well, sounds like Rubio's coming back, right? So you didn't lose him, and it's going to sound like he's coming back the very minute he's healthy. So you basically got Karis LeVert for free, and he didn't have enough time to Garland was hurt when he first got here and was out. Then he comes back or the All-Star break, he gets hurt, LeVert gets hurt, and then he comes back and Jared Allen's out. So I mean, it's just not, you can't judge a guy in that little of a time. And you're right, John, this is a win-win situation for the Cavs, because if he does come back and doesn't produce or produce like you hoped, then he's an expiring contract. And in the NBA, that's invaluable at the trade deadline and even before that.
Well, and not only that, but you mentioned the Cavs didn't give up much for him. And I believe since they got that lottery pick back, that protected pick, that now goes to next year for the Pacers. And if the Cavs somehow are in the lottery this year, that pick, I believe, Sam, turns into a second rounder.
Yep.
Yeah.
In what year?
Everybody in Cavs Nation will be upset if the Cavs are drafting in the lottery again next year. They want that pick to go to everybody who cares deeply about the Cavs wants the Pacers to have their pick next year. So they didn't really lose it, because if the Cavs are drafting in the lottery again next year, something's gone really awry.
Yep. 100%.
All right, guys. Well, that'll wrap it up here. We'll wait and see what the Cavaliers do coming up here on Thursday, June 23rd for the NBA draft with the 14th overall pick. We'll break down that draft class and selection on this next episode of Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast. Hopefully we can get our buddy Chase Smith back here. Remember, you can follow our guests, Sam Amico at Amico Hoops on Twitter. Read his stuff at hoopswire.com. He'll have more on full draft recap coming up there on hoopswire.com the minute it completes, or actually you'll probably be updating it as you go, I'm sure.
We will be updating it as it happens live. Yeah, I've already written some stuff in preparation. I'm not like Chase Smith and just take the summer off because I'm too big of a celebrity. I actually work in the summer.
Well, and you're going to have your latest and final mock draft up on Hoops Wire, Sam, on Thursday morning. Is that correct?
Yeah, late Wednesday night, Thursday morning for the normal crowd.
Okay. And you can follow our man here, JIA, Jeremy in Akron, at Jeremy in Akron. Jeremy, we'll talk with you again later this week, buddy. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this draft pick.
Yep, let's go.
Once it happens. Hopefully it's one of these two guys that we want. Remember, follow the pod at Cavs on the Break. Follow me at John_Sabol. And thank you if you haven't already, but subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. If you do that, you'll get updates and notifications to your phone of when we drop the latest episodes, just like this one here. Guys, thanks so much. We'll talk again soon. And thank you guys out there for listening.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, let's go.
Congratulations, Cleveland. Your decades-long wait is finally over. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.